Imagine stepping off a street lined with marble mansions, where millionaires' wives parade in French silk, worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. You walk, 15 minutes just. 15 minutes sand, suddenly you're wading through knee-deep mud mixed with human waste, surrounded by thousands of feral pigs eating garbage, whilst children sleep in pitch-black rooms that haven't seen sunlight in years. This isn't some apocalyptic fiction. This was real life in 1860s New York City, and the place was called 5 Points, the most dangerous square mile on the entire face of the earth. Before we dive into this nightmare, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. City and country. I absolutely love seeing how far these stories travel across the globe. Right? Now brace yourself, because what you're about to hear will change how you see New York forever. New York in 1860 was a city of absolutely staggering contrasts. If you strolled down Broadway, the city's grand boulevard, you'd hear the rhythmic clip-clop of expensive horses pulling carriages. You'd see the Astors, the Vanderbilts, America's new aristocracy showing off their wealth without a shred of shame. This was the Gilded Age in its infancy, when America was aggressively announcing itself as a global superpower, a nation of unlimited potential and unstoppable ambition. The buildings were magnificent. The shops overflowed with luxury goods imported from Europe. Men wore top hats and carried walking sticks. Women wore dresses that cost more than a working man's annual wage. This was wealth on a scale most people couldn't even comprehend, and it was on full display for anyone walking past. But here's the thing about New York in 1860. Turn one corner, walk 15 minutes south from all that marble and silk, and the entire world transforms into something out of your worst nightmares. The pavement literally disappears beneath your feet, replaced by a black, sticky swamp of mud, animal waste, and rotting garbage. The air doesn't smell of expensive perfume anymore. It reeks of stagnant water, coal dust, and death. Welcome to 5 Points. And honestly, nothing I say can fully prepare you for just how horrific this place actually was. First, let's talk about why this specific location became hell on earth. Because geologically speaking, this neighborhood was built on a catastrophic mistake. The area was originally a beautiful freshwater lake called the Collect Pond. As New York expanded rapidly in the early 1800s, city planners made an absolutely fatal decision. They drained the lake and filled it in with trash, dead animals, and loose dirt to create new land for development. Think about that for a second. They built an entire neighborhood on top of an unstable landfill. By 1860, the land was literally rotting beneath people's feet. Buildings sank into the muck. Streets became impassable swamps. The whole area was geologically unsound, and thousands of people were forced to live there because they had absolutely nowhere else to go. At the heart of 5 Points stood a building that became legendary for sheer horror, the Old Brewery. Originally built as a factory for Coulter's beer back when the area was still respectable, it had been converted into what can only be described as a human hive. Over 1,000 men, women, and children lived inside this single, rotting structure. Let that number sink in. 1,000 people in one building. It was so dangerous that for nearly 20 years, the police flat out refused to enter it after dark. It stood like a fortress of poverty, its broken windows stuffed with rags, looming over the muddy intersection as a monument to human misery. Inside the Old Brewery, the layout was deliberately confusing a labyrinth, designed to trap and confuse. There were rooms in the center of the building, famously called the Den of Thieves, that had no windows, no natural light, and absolutely no ventilation. Imagine living your entire existence in pitch blackness. Children born in these rooms sometimes didn't see actual sunlight until they were several years old. Their entire early childhood was spent in darkness. In one notorious room called the Cave, 20 families lived together on a floor covered in straw. Not 20 people, 20 families. Privacy was a luxury that simply didn't exist. Murder in these hallways wasn't some shocking crime. It was part of the daily routine. Bodies were discovered regularly, and often nobody even bothered to report it. Stepping outside the Old Brewery offered absolutely no relief whatsoever. In 1860, New York had no sanitation department. The city's solution to garbage disposal was both simple and revolting. Pigs, thousands upon thousands of feral hogs roamed the streets freely, eating the rubbish and human waste that people threw directly from their windows. They were the city's cleaners, Egypt's unofficial sanitation system. You'd see children actually riding these pigs like horses through knee-deep sludge. If you wore decent boots into 5 Points, they were completely ruined within seconds by the mixture of manure, mud, and God knows what else coating the streets. Alongside the pigs worked the rag pickers, the absolute bottom of society's food chain. These desperately poor souls made a meager living using metal hooks to dig through the filth for anything salvageable: old bones, scraps of glass, torn cloth. They were recycling the city's waste for literal pennies. Rag picker might work 14 brutal hours just to earn enough for a stale loaf of bread and a spot on a floor somewhere to sleep. And those bones they collected, they went to the bone boilers. Factories throughout 5 Points would boil rotting animal carcasses to manufacture glue. The smell was described by visitors as a physical assault on the senses, like being punched in the face with stench. A thick yellow fog of rendered fat and coal smoke hung permanently over the neighborhood 24 hours a day, coating the lungs of every man, woman, and child forced to breathe it. But here's something genuinely fascinating. 5 Points wasn't just unrelenting misery. Amidst all this horror, something extraordinary was being created. This was the birthplace of American rhythm. The place where modern American culture was being forged in the most unlikely circumstances imaginable. Beneath those rotting buildings were dance halls, like Almack's here. Irish immigrants and African Americans lived in socialists together, something that was actually illegal in most of America at the time. In these smoky underground spaces, they mixed Irish jigs with African shuffles and stumps, creating something entirely new: tap dancing. The art form that would eventually define American entertainment was born in the muddy cellars of the worst slum in the Western world. If you wanted darker entertainment, and plenty of people did, you went to Kit Burns's Sportsman Hall. In the center of this grotty bar sat a wooden pit. Handlers would dump a sack containing 100 live rats into the ring, release a trained terrier dog, and spectators would bet on how quickly the dog could kill them all. The floor ran slick with blood. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the fumes of cheap gin. It was brutal entertainment for a brutal world, where men cheered for death just to forget their own miserable lives for an hour. In 5 Points, where law was essentially non-existent, the only protection was tribal loyalty. This was the legendary era of the gangs. The Dead Rabbits, the Plug Ooglies, the Roach Guards, the Bowery Boys. These weren't just loose collections of criminals, they were organized armies, each controlling specific territory, each fiercely protecting their own. The battles were genuinely medieval in their brutality. In July 1857, a massive street war erupted that lasted for 2 solid days. They fought with brickbats, paving stones ripped from the streets, iron bars, clubs, knives. The police were completely powerless. They literally stood on the sidelines and watched helplessly as the gangs tore entire blocks apart. This wasn't just crime, this was civil war for control of the streets. But the danger wasn't only in the streets, it was in your food, in what you drank. Most of New York's milk came from what were called swill dairies. Operations that were as horrific as they sound. Cows were kept in underground basements, never seeing sunlight, fed the hot mash left over from whiskey distilleries. These animals were rotting alive, their tails literally falling off from disease and malnutrition. The milk they produced was gray and obviously diseased, so dairy operators mixed it with chalk, plaster, and eggs to turn it white and make it saleable. This poison killed an estimated 8,000 infants in Manhattan in a single year. 8,000 babies, dead from contaminated milk. That's not an exaggeration, that's documented fact. The most tragic victims of 5 Points were the street Arabs, thousands of homeless orphans who somehow survived in this nightmare. During the day, they sold newspapers or shined shoes, trying to scrape together enough pennies to survive. At night, they huddled together over steam grates, rising from basements, desperately trying not to freeze to death. If you had 5 cents, which most didn't, you could pay for a spot in a crowded shelter. If you didn't have that nickel, you slept in an alley and hoped you'd wake up in the morning. This was a society where a 7-year-old boy had to become a ruthless businessman just to survive another night. To fight this absolute chaos, the newly formed police force adopted cutting-edge technology. Photography. They created what they called the Rogues Gallery, dragging criminals into the station and pinning their photographs to the wall. It was the first systematic attempt to bring order to the underworld. Detectives would spend hours staring into the faces of pickpockets, thieves, and murderers, trying to memorize the features of their enemies. The simmering tension in New York finally exploded violently in July 1863. The Civil War draft sparked the largest insurrection in American history. For 4 days, the city burned. Mobs roamed the streets, hunting the wealthy and brutally attacking black New Yorkers. They famously burned down the Colored Orphan Asylum, a horrific act that remains one of the darkest moments in the city's history. It got so catastrophically bad that the Union Army had to march straight from the battlefield at Gettysburg directly into the streets of New York, firing artillery cannons into the crowds just to restore some semblance of order. American soldiers were killing American citizens in the middle of Manhattan. Eventually, the city's leaders decided that 5 Points was a cancer that had to be surgically removed. In the late 19th century, a crusade led by reformer Jacob Riis, photographer and journalist who documented the slums with shocking, unforgettable images, finally shamed the city into action. They tore it all down. The old brewery, the sinking houses, the filthy grog shops, demolished every last building. The neighborhood was literally erased from existence. As if by removing the physical structures, they could somehow erase the memory of what had happened there. Today, if you visit New York, Columbus Park in Chinatown sits directly over the ghosts of 5 Points. The mud is long gone, replaced by concrete and grass. But the stories remain embedded in the DNA of the city. The millions who fought desperately to survive in that hellish square-mile-shaped New York in ways that are still felt today. 5 Points reminds us that cities are just built from brick and mortar, are rebuilt from human struggle, from suffering, from resilience, and from the extraordinary ability of people to create beauty and culture even in the most horrific circumstances.